Oh,
behold the strength and grace of this noble creature. Feel the power!
Everyone thought Marcus Webb was going to buy a tractor that day. He had saved money for 8 years. 8 years of working every job he could find. 8 years of fixing fences, training horses for other people, doing seasonal ranch work in the summer and odd jobs in the winter. 8 years of living alone in a small house, eating simple food, never buying anything he did not absolutely need. His friends knew he had money saved. His neighbors knew it. The people at the feed store knew it. Everyone in the valley knew that old Marcus Webb had finally saved enough money to buy a tractor, and that tractor was going to make his life easier. Nobody knew that Marcus Webb had no intention of buying a tractor at all. The county fair was held in the first week of June, when the heat was just starting to become serious, and the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. The fairgrounds stretched across 30 acres of dry grass and dust. There were rides for children that screamed and spun in the bright sun. There were game booths where people threw balls and tried to win stuffed animals. There were food stalls that sold fried things that smelled incredible. And in the back, away from all the fun and noise, there was the livestock auction. Marcus arrived early. He did not go to the pretty parts of the fair. He did not look at the carnival rides or stop at the food stalls. He walked directly to the back, where the animals were kept in pens made of metal railings. The sun was already hot, and the smell of animals and dust and hay was thick in the air. Horses stood in most of the pens, beautiful horses, horses with shiny coats and clean manes. Horses that looked like someone had spent hours preparing them to be sold. But there was one pen that looked different. The horse in that pen stood in the corner, not in the open where people could see it easily. The animal's coat was dark and dull, like old charcoal that had been sitting in rain. You could see the horse's bones clearly under the skin. Very clearly. The ribs showed like dark lines. The hips stuck out sharply. The animal's head hung down low, and it did not move when Marcus approached. Other people walked past this pen without stopping. They looked at the beautiful horses. They pointed at the ones with the best bloodlines. They made notes about which animals they wanted to bid on. But they did not even slow down when they passed the dark, thin horse in the corner. One woman actually wrinkled her nose and walked faster, as if the horse's condition was something contagious. Marcus stood in front of the pen. He did not approach the gate. He did not make loud noises or sudden movements. He simply stood there, quiet, watching. The horse did not look up. The animal's head stayed low and its body stayed still. But Marcus had the strange feeling that the horse knew someone was looking at it. The animal just did not care. "That one is not worth your time," a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to see Frank Delacroix. Frank owned a ranch 3 miles from Marcus's property, and Frank was the kind of man who thought he knew everything about horses. Frank was smiling that smile that meant he was about to tell Marcus something he did not want to hear. "They brought that horse in from an estate sale," Frank continued, leaning against the fence railing. "Neglect case. Animal was starving when they found it. The vet said it probably came from some place where nobody took care of anything. The horse is still here because nobody wants to buy it. They have been trying to sell that animal for 3 auction cycles. It does not sell because it is broken," Marcus nodded. He did not argue with Frank. He knew that arguments with people like Frank were usually a waste of time. Frank left to look at other horses, and Marcus stayed. He stayed for 2 hours. He sat on a wooden barrel near the pen and watched the horse. He watched other people come and go. He watched families arrive at the fair and watch the animals. He watched young kids press their faces against the metal railings, pointing at the pretty horses. And he watched all those people completely ignore the dark horse in the corner. Nobody even looked at it. By lunchtime, Marcus had not moved. He had watched at least 200 people walk past that pen. Not one of them had stopped. Not one of them had looked twice. One teenage girl had actually made a face of disgust when she saw the horse, as if the animal was something ugly and wrong. The auctioneer's voice came over a megaphone at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The auction was beginning. Marcus left his barrel and walked to the auction yard, where the animals were brought out one by one for people to bid on. The crowd was smaller than it had been in the morning. People were tired. The heat was intense. Some people had already left the fair to go home. The auctioneer started with the most beautiful horses first. A young palomino with a shining coat brought $12,000. A registered mare with perfect bloodlines brought $15,000. The crowd got excited during these sales. People called out bids quickly. There was competition. There was energy. But as the afternoon went on, the quality of the horses changed. They were less impressive. They were ordinary. The bids got smaller. The crowd got quieter. By 4 o'clock, the energy had completely disappeared. People were checking their watches. People were talking about dinner. The remaining horses were not bringing serious money anymore. That is when the auctioneer called Lot 47. The handlers brought the dark, thin horse out of the pen and led it into the auction ring. The animal walked slowly, as if each step was difficult. The horse did not seem aware of the crowd or the noise or the people watching. The animal just walked where it was told to walk, with no energy and no spirit. "Here we have," the auctioneer said into his megaphone. "A 2-year-old quarter-horse cross, young animal, good bone structure, strong hindquarters, once you get some weight on him. Who will start the bidding at $500? Nobody raised their hand. The silence was shocking. It was the kind of silence that feels like a physical thing. It was the silence of people who did not want to pay money for something everyone else had rejected. It was the silence of people who had already made up their minds. "400, then," the auctioneer said. He sounded bored now. He did not believe anyone would bid on this horse. "Still nothing. $200 for this young animal?" Marcus raised his hand. Just his forearm, just a simple raising of his arm that he had been waiting all day to do. The auctioneer's eyes widened slightly. He had not expected anyone to bid at all. "We have 200, the auctioneer said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Do we have 250? The silence that followed was absolute. Everybody in the crowd knew that nobody else wanted this horse. There was no competition. There was no doubt. The horse was worthless to everyone here except for this one old man. Sold, the auctioneer said. $200. To the gentleman in the grey shirt. Marcus walked forward to collect his papers. Around him, people whispered. He heard the words clearly because they did not try to hide them. That man is crazy. What a waste of money. That horse is never going to be anything. He does not know what he is doing. Frank appeared again and clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "Well," Frank said with false sympathy, "you got yourself a project." Marcus did not respond. He was already watching the handlers lead the dark horse out of the auction ring. The animal moved the same way it had moved before, slowly, carefully, as if the world was dangerous and unpredictable. But then the horse's head turned. The animal looked directly at Marcus, and for just 1 second, Marcus saw something in the horse's eyes. Recognition. As if the horse had been waiting. As if the horse had somehow known that someone would finally come. As if this broken, rejected animal understood that its entire life was about to change. Marcus completed the paperwork. He paid the fee. He arranged for someone to transport the horse in a trailer. And as he drove home, with the dark horse riding in the trailer behind his truck, Marcus thought about all those people at the fair. He thought about Frank and his pity. He thought about the woman who wrinkled her nose. He thought about the 200 people who had walked past without even looking.
The horse bit him.
Nobody
It was not a
understood
vicious bite,
what he had just done.
Not the kind meant to cause
Nobody
serious
understood that
injury.
he had not
But
bought
it
a
was
broken
warning.
horse.
It was a horse
He had
saying,
bought something that
without
everyone
words,
else had
that he
been
did
too
not
afraid to
trust this
see.
man yet. That he did not trust anyone. The bite left marks on Marcus's palm. Dark purple bruises that would last for 2 weeks. His neighbor, Tom, saw the marks when Marcus came to the feed store and immediately shook his head. "That horse is going to kill you," Tom said flatly. "You know that, right? You spent your entire savings on an animal that is going to hurt you." Marcus did not argue. He had known the risks. He had known that buying Cypher might be the biggest mistake of his life. But he also knew something that Tom did not know. He knew that a bite was not anger. A bite was fear, and fear was something that could be healed if you were patient enough. The second week was harder than the first. Cypher would not eat the grain that Marcus prepared. The horse would not let Marcus approach closer than 10 feet. When Marcus tried to lead the colt from the stable to the pasture, Cypher reared up, his eyes rolling white with terror, and nearly fell backward onto the wooden rails. Marcus caught the lead rope and spoke in a voice so quiet that it was almost a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Whatever happened before whatever they did to you, that is not going to happen here. But the horse did not believe him. Not yet. The turning point came on the 14th day, at 2 o'clock in the morning. Marcus woke to a sound he had never heard before. It was a horse in genuine distress, a sound that no experienced handler would mistake for anything other than panic and pain. He pulled on his clothes without bothering to grab a jacket and ran to the stable. What he found made his chest tight. Cypher was tangled in the fence rails. The Colt had somehow gotten his back leg caught between the boards, and in his panic he had struggled so hard that the wooden rail had cracked. The horse was sweating heavily, breathing in short gasps, his eyes wide with the kind of animal terror that comes from being trapped. Blood dripped from a gash on the Colt's hind leg. Without thinking, Marcus approached the frightened horse. Most experienced handlers would have waited for help, would have called a vet, would have taken precautions. But Marcus moved directly to Cypher, speaking in that same quiet voice. "I'm going to help you," he said. "I'm going to help you." He did not grab the horse. He did not pull or force. Instead, he knelt down and carefully, slowly, began to work the wooden rail loose from around Cypher's trapped leg. The Colt struck out with his front hoof, nearly hitting Marcus in the head. The horse screamed, an actual scream that echoed through the stable and out into the dark night. But Marcus did not stop. He just kept working, kept speaking in that low, steady voice. "I'm not leaving you," he said. "I will not leave you." It took 20 minutes to free the horse's leg. When Cypher finally came loose, he collapsed into the straw, breathing heavily, his entire body shaking. His hind leg was bleeding badly. Marcus went into the house and came back with clean water, bandages, and antiseptic. He cleaned the wound carefully, speaking the entire time in that same quiet voice, explaining every movement. "This will sting," he said, "but it will keep the wound clean." And something changed in that moment. When Marcus wrapped the bandage around Cypher's leg, the horse did not pull away. When Marcus stood up and prepared to leave, the Colt reached out and touched his arm with his nose. It was a small gesture. It was barely anything, but it was everything. The next morning, something even more shocking happened. Marcus came to the stable expecting to find a horse that was still afraid, still trapped in the patterns of abuse and abandonment that had created his initial terror. But instead, when Marcus opened the stable door, Cypher walked directly to him. The Colt lowered his head and allowed Marcus to place his hand on the horse's neck. "We're going to be okay," Marcus whispered. "Both of us. We're going to be okay." By the third week, the transformation had begun in earnest. Cypher started to eat from Marcus's hand. The Colt began to understand that food meant safety, that Marcus's presence meant nothing to fear. The horse's ribs still showed through his coat, but his eyes had changed. The white-rimmed terror was fading. Something else was replacing it, something that looked almost like trust. Word of this began to spread through the town, and with it came mockery. At the diner, Marcus overheard a conversation between two farmers. "Poor Marcus," one of them said, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Lost his mind completely. Spending all that money on a horse that is probably going to die anyway. Should have put the animal down at the fair." That is what most people would have done. At the feed store, old Pete laughed when he saw Marcus buying special grain and supplements. "You are feeding it like it is a racehorse," Pete said. "That is not a racehorse. That is a broken animal, and broken animals stay broken. You know that, do not you?" Marcus said nothing. He had learned long ago that some people's minds could not be changed by words. People could only be changed by seeing something they could not deny. By the 6th week, Cypher had gained 20 pounds. The Colt's coat had begun to shine. The hollow look in the horse's eyes had been replaced by something that resembled awareness. One afternoon, the veterinarian came to check on a neighbor's cattle, and Marcus asked him to examine Cypher. Dr. Holloway spent an hour with the horse. He checked Cypher's teeth, his heart, his lungs, his legs. He examined the scars and noted the condition of the hooves. When he finished, he looked at Marcus with an expression that was difficult to read. "Physically," Dr. Holloway said slowly, "he is improving faster than I would expect. But Marcus, I have to be honest. This horse has been through severe trauma. Psychological trauma. The body can heal, but the mind is a different story. This animal may never trust humans again. Not really. And even if he does, there is no guarantee that he will ever be useful for anything. You understand that? Understand, Marcus said. Do you? Holloway asked. Because you're investing everything in something that might never pay back. Not in money. In anything. Marcus looked at Cypher. The horse was standing in the paddock, looking at Marcus with those dark, intelligent eyes. The colt was no longer the broken animal from the auction. But he was not healed yet either. He was somewhere in between, in the dangerous space where hope and doubt fought for control. I'm not investing in the future, Marcus said quietly. I'm investing in right now. Right now, this horse needs someone to believe in him. Right now, that is enough. But even as he said it, Marcus had no idea why he felt so certain. He had no idea why he believed so completely that Cypher was meant for something more than just survival. He only knew that something inside him, something deeper than logic or reason, insisted that this broken horse was carrying a secret that would become important someday. He just had no idea how important that secret would turn out to be. The new law said that people who hurt animals on purpose would go to prison for up to 5 years. It said people who steal animals would have to pay money equal to the value of the animals. It said animal cruelty was a serious crime. The news of a new law spread everywhere. People on social media celebrated. They said this was justice. They said this would help animals everywhere. They said Marcus and Eleanor and the 8 foals had changed the world. Marcus did not feel like he had changed the world. He felt like he had just done what any good person would do. But he understood now that his actions had made a difference. His decision to stop his horse and look down had saved 8 foals. His willingness to tell the truth in court had sent a criminal to prison. His story had helped create a new law that would protect animals for many years. The 8 foals did not know any of this. They did not know about the trial. They did not know about the new law. They did not know that they had changed things. They only knew that they were alive and safe and cared for. They only knew that they had a second chance. But Marcus knew, and Eleanor knew, and thousands of people around the world knew. The story of 8 foals left to die in the snow had become more than just a story about animal rescue. It had become a story about justice. It had become a story about how one person's kindness could create change that helped many, many animals. The foals were safe. The criminal was in prison. The laws had changed. The world was a little bit better because Marcus had stopped his horse and looked down into that ravine. And the golden foal, named Sunrise, continued to run and play and live her life, not knowing that she had helped save countless other animals. The valley did not look like it was dying, but it was. Marcus did not understand this at first. When he drove through the town in early April, the streets looked normal. The shops were open. Farmers were still working their fields. Children still played in yards. But if you listened carefully, if you paid attention to the conversations in the feed store and the diner and the gas station, you heard the real story. The story nobody wanted to say out loud yet, but everyone was thinking about constantly. The water was running out. Nobody knew exactly when it started to disappear. Maybe 5 years ago, the springs that had always run full began running slower. Maybe 10 years ago, the reservoirs started being a little less full each season. Maybe 15 years ago, the farmers started noticing that the irrigation channels did not flow quite as strong as they used to. But this year, everything was different. This year, the shortage was impossible to ignore. Dr. Sarah Martinez was a young engineer, maybe 35 years old, with dark hair and glasses that she was always pushing up on her nose. She worked for the Valley Water Board, and she had given a presentation to all the farmers 2 weeks ago. Marcus had sat in the back of the community center, listening to her explain the numbers on her charts. The charts showed lines going down, down, down. The charts showed that the underground water supply, the aquifer that the valley depended on, was empty in some places and getting emptier everywhere else. We have maybe 6 months, Sarah had said quietly, staring at the graphs like she wished she could erase them. Maybe less. Unless something changes dramatically, the valley faces a serious water crisis by summer. The farmers had asked worried questions. Sarah had no good answers. And that was how Marcus had learned that the place he loved, the place where he had lived for 15 years, might be about to disappear. He thought about this as he worked with Cypher in the pasture. The horse had become beautiful now. Not just healthy, but truly beautiful. The black coat shone like polished stone. The ribs no longer showed. The colt's eyes were bright and aware and full of something that Marcus did not have words for. Sometimes, when Marcus would walk through the pasture, Cypher would follow him the way a shadow follows light. The horse trusted him completely now. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a simple, steady presence that made Marcus feel less alone in the world. On the 15th of April, something happened that changed everything. Marcus was walking the farthest edge of his property, the northern boundary where the land sloped slightly downward and the grass grew thick and wild. He was checking the fence line, looking for any sections that needed repair. Cypher was following behind him, as the horse always did, moving quietly through the pasture. The day was warm but not hot, with clouds building in the west. The sky had that particular color that meant rain might come, though the weather report said no rain was expected. Marcus was so focused on the fence line that he did not see the exact moment when Cypher's behavior changed. One moment the horse was following him calmly. The next moment the colt had stopped completely. Marcus turned around to see what was wrong. Cypher was standing perfectly still, about 30 feet behind him, with his head raised high. The horse's nostrils were flaring slightly, as if he was smelling something. But more than that, the colt was staring at one specific spot on the ground, a spot that looked exactly like every other spot around it. Marcus walked back to where Cypher was standing. "What is it?" he asked, though he knew the horse could not answer him. Cypher stepped forward. The colt walked directly to the spot he had been staring at and stopped. Then the horse did something that Marcus had never seen him do before. Cypher pawed at the ground. Not a casual scratch, not a nervous habit, but a deliberate, focused pawing. The colt's hoof struck the earth once, twice, 3 times, in exactly the same spot. Then Cypher stepped back and looked at Marcus. The message in that look was impossible to ignore. "Here. Something is here." Marcus knelt down. He pushed away the grass and found nothing unusual. Just earth. Just dirt and grass and roots. He pressed his hand against the ground, and it felt normal. Damp, but normal. He looked up at Cypher, and the horse was staring at him with an intensity that bordered on desperate. "I do not understand," Marcus said quietly. "What do you want me to see?" But Cypher just stared at that spot. Marcus went into town the next morning. He parked his truck outside the waterboard office and walked in without an appointment. Sarah Martinez was in a small office surrounded by maps and computer screens. She looked tired. She had dark circles under her eyes. When Marcus explained that he wanted to talk about his property, about his well, Sarah looked up with sudden focus. "Your property?" she said. "The one on Ridgeline Road?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I have a well that has never dried up. Not in 72 years. I thought maybe that was worth knowing about." Sarah stood up so quickly that her coffee cup nearly fell over. "Show me," she said. "Take me there right now." 2 hours later, Sarah was standing in Marcus's pasture with a notebook in her hands, taking measurements and making notes. Marcus showed her the spot where Cypher had pawed at the ground. Sarah looked at it carefully, compared it to her map, and her face went very pale. "This is directly above the deepest part of the underground aquifer in this entire region," she said quietly. "According to all our data, this spot should have no water. This area should be completely dry. But you are telling me you have a well that never runs dry." "I'm telling you that," Marcus said. Sarah looked at Cypher, who was standing a few feet away, watching them. "How did the horse know?" she whispered. "I do not know," Marcus said. But he knew. Within 1 week, state geological engineers arrived at Marcus's property. They brought equipment and drilling machines. They drilled deep into the earth at the spot where Cypher had pawed the ground. And what they found made every single person involved stop what they were doing and stare at the results in shock. Beneath Marcus's property was not just water. It was an enormous, hidden underground lake. A massive reservoir of fresh water that had been sitting beneath the valley, completely unknown, for millions of years. The water was clean. The water was pure. The water was endless. The engineers ran their tests 3 times because they could not believe the results the first 2 times. But the third time confirmed it. One man began to cry. Another man laughed. Sarah Martinez sat down on the ground, right there in the dirt, and put her head in her hands. This water, one of the engineers said, his voice shaking, this water could save the entire valley. This water could save every farm, every business, every family. This water could save thousands of people. And none of it would have been found if a broken horse, a horse everyone said was worthless and impossible, had not known something that no human being had known. A horse had carried the answer inside him all along. He had just been waiting for someone to listen. When the news spread through the valley, people did not know what to think. They did not know whether to celebrate or question or demand answers. But one thing became clear to everyone. The man who had bought the broken horse at the fair, the man they had all laughed at, had somehow led the valley to its salvation, and he had done it without knowing. He had done it simply by believing in something everyone else had thrown away. The moment the drilling equipment arrived at Marcus's property, everything changed. 3 massive trucks pulled up the long driveway early on a Monday morning in May. The trucks carried drilling machines, pipes, pumps, and equipment that Marcus had never seen before. The engineers and workers wore hard hats and safety vests. They moved with the kind of urgent purpose that meant something important was happening. By 9 o'clock, they had set up a temporary camp on Marcus's land, and by 10 o'clock, they were beginning the first deep drilling operation. Sarah Martinez arrived shortly after the drilling began. She was wearing a hard hat too, and she looked like she had not slept much in the past week. Her eyes had dark circles under them, and she was holding a large folder filled with maps and research papers. When she saw Marcus, she walked directly to him without stopping to talk to anyone else. "Show me the exact spot again," she said. The spot where the horse pawed at the ground. Marcus walked her to the northern boundary of his property, the place where Cypher had stood and stared with such desperate intensity. The drilling equipment was being set up at several locations, but this particular spot, was where the deepest drilling would happen. "Here," Sarah asked, marking the location on her map. "Here," Marcus confirmed. Sarah looked at the spot for a long time. She was quiet, thinking about something. Finally, she spoke. "Do you understand what the engineers found yesterday?" "I understand there is water," Marcus said. "There is not just water," Sarah said quietly. "There is an ocean. Underground. An actual underground ocean beneath your property. And it is in exactly the spot where your horse told you to look." The drilling began immediately. By that afternoon, the first core sample came up from deep in the earth. The engineers examined it carefully, made notes, and then one of them, a man named Robert who was probably 60 years old, simply sat down on the ground. He sat down right there in the dirt, and he stared at the rock sample in his hands like he was looking at something that had changed his entire understanding of the world. "This is not possible," he whispered. "This should not exist here." By Wednesday, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Cypher knew something that the engineers were trying to figure out. Every single time the engineers prepared to drill at a new location, the horse would do something. Sometimes Cypher would stand at the fence and stare in a specific direction. Sometimes the Colt would paw at the ground when Marcus walked near a certain spot. Sometimes the horse would make a soft, nickering sound, a quiet, urgent call that seemed to be pointing at something invisible to human eyes. And every single time, when the engineers drilled at the spot Cypher had indicated, they found water. Not just any water. The deepest water. The cleanest water. The places where the underground reservoir was strongest and most accessible. On Thursday afternoon, something happened that made even the engineers stop and stare. A group of engineers and geologists were standing around one of the drilling sites, discussing measurements and water flow rates. They were speaking in technical language, using words that Marcus did not understand. Cypher was in the pasture about 50 feet away, grazing quietly. But then the horse's head came up suddenly, as if someone had called his name. The Colt walked directly toward the group of engineers. The engineers did not know Cypher, and horses sometimes make people nervous, so they started to move away. But Marcus called out softly. "Let him come," Marcus said. Cypher walked through the group of engineers, completely ignoring them. The horse walked directly to one specific spot, a place that had not been marked for drilling yet, and stopped. The colt pawed at the ground exactly 3 times, in exactly the same way he had pawed at the ground on Marcus's property the first time. Then Cypher stepped back and looked at the engineers. One of the engineers, a younger woman named Dr. Lisa, slowly lowered her clipboard. "That is the spot," she whispered. "According to our calculations, that is exactly where the deepest concentration should be." "How would the horse know that?" another engineer asked. Nobody had an answer. That night, Marcus stood at his window and looked out at Cypher in the pasture. The horse was standing perfectly still, looking toward the northern boundary where the drilling equipment was set up. It was as if the colt was keeping watch over something, as if the horse was guarding a secret that had been buried in the earth for millions of years. Friday morning brought the confirmation that changed everything. The State Water Authority arrived with official papers and maps. They came with lawyers and specialists. They came with people who had the power to make big decisions. They stood in Marcus's living room, surrounded by his simple furniture and his quiet walls, and they explained what they had discovered. "Your property," the official said, his name was Mr. Patterson, "sits directly above the largest underground water source in this entire region. Conservative estimates suggest enough water to supply the valley for 5 years, possibly longer." "How is that possible?" Marcus asked. "Why is it only under my property?" "We do not know," Mr. Patterson said. "The geological formations are unusual, almost like the earth itself arranged this specific spot to protect and preserve this water. The scientists are calling it unprecedented." "And the horse?" Marcus asked. "How did the horse know?" Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable. He was a man who dealt in facts and figures, not mysteries and inexplicable animal behavior. "We do not have an explanation for that," he said finally. "Some animals are sensitive to things humans cannot perceive. Electromagnetic fields, changes in the earth. We do not fully understand animal senses." But Marcus understood something different. He understood that Cypher was not just sensitive to something invisible. The horse was connected to it. The colt carried knowledge in his bones and blood that went beyond simple animal instinct. The horse had been waiting for someone to listen. And when Marcus had listened, when Marcus had shown that broken creature compassion and care, the horse's knowledge had finally become accessible. By Saturday morning, word had spread through the valley. A man had bought a rejected horse at the fair. That horse was somehow connected to a massive underground water source that would save the entire valley. The story was too remarkable to keep quiet. By noon, people were driving to Marcus's property, trying to see the horse and the drilling equipment and understand how something so impossible could be true. Marcus watched from his porch as strangers arrived. He saw Frank Delacroix drive up in his truck, his face pale with shock. He saw the woman who had wrinkled her nose at the fair, now staring at Cypher with wonder in her eyes. He saw old Pete from the feed store standing at the fence, shaking his head in disbelief. "I thought that horse was broken," Frank said to Marcus, approaching the porch. Marcus said simply, "But broken things can heal if someone cares enough." "But how did he know about the water?" Frank asked. "How is that possible?" Marcus did not answer. He was watching Cypher in the pasture. The horse was standing calmly, unbothered by the attention and the strangers. The colt seemed to understand that his secret was becoming the valley's salvation. "I do not think we are supposed to understand it," Marcus said finally. "I think we are just supposed to accept it. This horse was rejected by everyone. He was thrown away like he was nothing. But he was carrying something precious inside him the whole time. The valley rejected him. The valley was wrong." Sarah Martinez arrived late that afternoon. She parked her truck and walked directly to Marcus. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying. "The water is real," she said. "Every test confirms it. Your horse did not just find water. Your horse found salvation. He found a thing that keeps thousands of people alive." Marcus looked at Cypher, and the horse looked back at him. "No," Marcus said quietly. "The horse did not find it. The horse was always connected to it. He was just waiting for someone to believe in him first." And in that moment, everyone watching understood something true. The greatest discoveries were not about finding things in the earth. They were about finding value in the things the world had already thrown away. The news spread through the valley like water itself. A massive underground water source had been discovered beneath Marcus Webb's property. Not a small well, not a regular aquifer, an enormous, hidden lake of fresh water that had been sitting beneath the earth for millions of years, completely unknown, completely untouched. The water board held emergency meetings. State officials arrived in helicopters. Engineers worked around the clock to plan how to extract the water and get it to the farms and towns that desperately needed it. But the strangest part of the story was not the water itself. The strangest part was how they had found it. They had found it because a horse that everyone said was broken and worthless and impossible, had somehow known exactly where to look. A horse that had been starving and neglected and rejected by everyone at the fair had led a man to the salvation of an entire valley. By May, the valley knew the entire story. The newspapers came. The television stations came. Reporters asked Marcus questions that he did not know how to answer. How had he known? Why had he bought the horse? What had made him so certain that something important was beneath his property? Marcus had no explanation that satisfied anyone. I just believed in him, Marcus would say simply. When everyone else had thrown him away, I believed he was worth something. But the reporters wanted more. They wanted drama. They wanted a moment of inspiration or a vision or something that would make sense. They did not want to hear that Marcus had simply shown up every day, fed a horse, and waited. They did not want to hear that sometimes the most important things in life happen not because of intelligence or planning, but because of love. Still, the story captured something in people's hearts. A man nobody had understood was a hero. A horse everyone had rejected had saved thousands of lives. It was the kind of story that made people believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still goodness in the world. On June 21st, at exactly 6 a.m, the main extraction well on Marcus's property was going to start. This was the day that would change everything. This was the day that the water from beneath the earth would begin to flow upward. This was the day that the valley would finally be safe. Engineers had worked through the night to make sure everything was perfect. They had checked the pumps. They had tested the pressure systems. They had confirmed that the distribution lines were connected properly to the valley's irrigation network. Everything was ready. Marcus did not sleep the night before. He stood in his kitchen drinking coffee in the dark, thinking about everything that had happened in the past year. He thought about the fair. He thought about the moment he saw Cypher standing in the corner of that pen. He thought about the people who had called him crazy. He thought about the night the horse got trapped in the fence. He thought about the morning Cypher had pawed at the ground and somehow knew exactly where the water was. It did not make sense. None of it made logical sense. But it was real. At 5:30 in the morning, Marcus walked to the stable. He expected to find Cypher sleeping in his stall, like any normal horse would be at that hour. But when Marcus arrived, the stable door was already open. The horse was already awake. Cypher was standing in the paddock, completely alert, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. "You know what is about to happen," Marcus said quietly. It was not a question. The horse walked toward him. Cypher had become beautiful in the past year. The starved, frightened animal had transformed into a strong young stallion with a coat that shone like polished metal. But more than the physical change, something in the horse's eyes had changed. There was awareness there. There was understanding. Cypher nuzzled Marcus's chest, and Marcus put his arms around the horse's neck. "You're going to get to see what you have done," Marcus whispered. "You're going to get to see that you saved us all." Together, they walked to the well site. Sarah Martinez was already there with her team of engineers. The sun was just beginning to rise in the east, turning the sky from black to dark blue to that impossible shade of purple that only happens for a few moments before dawn. The engineers were making final checks. Their voices were quiet and serious. Everyone understood the importance of this moment. When Cypher arrived, some of the engineers looked surprised. They had grown used to seeing the horse on Marcus's property, but they had not expected him to be here at the well site. But nobody tried to send the horse away. There was something about Cypher's presence that seemed necessary somehow. Sarah walked over and put her hand on Cypher's neck. "This is because of you," she said to the horse. "Do you understand that?" Everything that is about to happen is because of you. The sky continued to lighten. The sun's edge appeared on the horizon, golden bright and full of promise. The engineers gathered around their instruments. One of them looked at his watch and nodded to the others. 5 seconds, someone called out. Marcus stood with his hand on Cypher's neck, feeling the horse's heart beating beneath his palm. The colt's breathing was calm and steady. The horse was ready. 3, 2, 1. The pump activated. The sound was tremendous. It was the sound of millions of gallons of water beginning to move from the depths of the earth toward the surface. It was the sound of life itself rising upward. The ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate. The metal equipment hummed with effort and power. And then water emerged from the well. Not a trickle, not a small stream. Water erupted from the ground like something alive, powerful and pure and essential. It flowed into the holding reservoir, filling it in minutes. It continued flowing into the distribution lines, beginning its journey toward the farms and towns and homes of the valley. The engineers erupted in cheers. One man was actually crying. Another man was laughing and crying at the same time. Sarah Martinez was staring at the flowing water with an expression of something like awe. But in that exact moment, something even more remarkable happened. Cypher lifted his head and made a sound. Not an A exactly, but something deeper and more meaningful. The horse's dark eyes tracked the flowing water, and the colt's nostrils flared slightly. It was as if the horse was acknowledging something. It was as if Cypher was saying, "Yes, this is what I knew. This is what I came to show you." One of the older engineers, a man named Dr. Leonard, who had worked with water systems for most of his life, was staring at the horse with complete bewilderment. "That is not possible," he said quietly. "A horse cannot possibly know about underground water sources. It is not biologically possible." But Marcus just stood there with his hand on Cypher's neck and said nothing, because some things could not be explained. Some things existed beyond the boundaries of what science could understand. Some things were just miracles. By afternoon, the news had spread across the entire region. The water was flowing. The extraction well was working perfectly. The valley was saved. Families who had been preparing to leave began to unpack. Farmers who had been planning to sell began to believe in the future again. Schools that had worried about closing stayed open. Businesses that had been shutting down began to hire workers again. One man and one horse had changed everything. That evening, as the sun set and the water continued to flow, people began arriving at Marcus's property. Families came. Farmers came. Children came. They came to see the well. They came to see the horse. They came to witness the source of their salvation. Marcus stood with Cypher as person after person approached the horse, touching his neck, thanking him, whispering words of gratitude into his ear. The horse stood calmly through it all, as if he understood exactly why these people had come. When the last person had left and darkness had finally fallen completely, Marcus led Cypher back to the stable. He groomed the horse carefully, speaking in that quiet voice that had become the language between them. "They understand now," Marcus said. "They understand what I saw at the fair. They understand that broken things can become important. They understand that the things the world rejects might be exactly what the world needs." Cypher lowered his head and allowed Marcus to rest his forehead against the horse's forehead. "Thank you for choosing me," Marcus whispered. "Thank you for letting me believe in you when nobody else would." The horse's breathing was warm against his face, steady and real and alive. Outside, the water continued to flow. Beneath the earth, the ancient reservoir continued to give. And in a small stable on the edge of a valley that had been saved, an old man and a young horse stood together in the darkness, having discovered that the things we save us in return. That sometimes the most important journeys begin when we finally decide to believe in something everyone else has thrown away.